The medieval period of Islamic history is dominated by Turco-Mongolian dynasties. Through a combination of migration, the Great Mongol Empire's conquests, and the use of slave soldiers from Turkestan, these dynasties ruled India, the Middle East, and Central Asia. One of the most impactful of these was the Timurids. Named after its ferocious and legendary founder, Timur, a man who can give Alexander the Great and Genghis Khan a run for their money as to who the greatest conqueror was. Timur would take his armies across Central Asia, Persia, India, Russia, and the Middle East, vanquishing anybody who stood in his way. In the wake of his death in 1405, his successors fought over the scraps of empire, leading to its terminal political decline over the next century. Despite this, Timurid cities such as Herat and Samarkand retained its place as centers of learning and art, inaugurating a period referred to as the Timurid Renaissance. At the same time as civil wars between family members were destroying the territorial integrity of the realm, incredible buildings were being constructed and leading scholars were finding patronage. This is the story of the Timurids. Throughout the 1200s, the reach of the Mongol Empire sprawled out to cover every corner of Asia and beyond. Genghis Khan and his progeny had dominated in a way unseen since the initial days of the Khilafah, some 5 centuries before. With their patented horse archers, cunning tactics, and sheer brutality, the Mongols quickly overran much of the Islamic world. But within 40 years of Genghis's death, his descendants would go to war with each other and subsequently split the empire into 4 parts. By the early 1400s, internal turmoil within the royal house and violent uprisings had diminished the empire's power. The Ilkhanate of Persia and Mesopotamia ceased to exist in the 1330s. The Golden Horde of Russia and Eastern Europe would soon encounter violent internal political disorder that was to directly put them at odds with Timur himself. The Yuan dynasty of China would soon find itself at the receiving end of major rebellions and uprisings. And lastly, the Chagatai Khanate of Central Asia had become divided in the 1340s. It is in this context that sometime in the 1330s, a child named Timur was born near Samarkand, a major center of Transoxiana. He was from the Barlas tribe, which was Mongolian but had been heavily Turkicized since their immigration to the area in the aftermath of the Mongol invasion in the 1220s, hence the phrase Turco-Mongolian. Timur's tribe was different from that of Genghis Khan and his descendants, who were from the imperial Burjigin clan. This is important to remember for our story later on. Timur was raised in the western Chagatai Khanate, which was racked with conflict and the absence of the rule of law. An underlying tension which led to some of this chaos was a clash between the nomads who retained their ancestors' mobile lifestyle versus the Chagatai rulers who had become sedentary and accustomed to city life. In the 1360s, the western Chagatai was so weak that it was invaded by the eastern Chagatai, also known as Mogholistan. If you're wondering whether the word Mogholistan is related to the Mughals of India, you'd be correct. The term Mughal actually comes from the Persian word for Mongol. When the area was invaded, Timur was made chief of the Barlas tribe, probably because he was deemed easy to manipulate. Timur was far too ambitious to be satisfied with his share, so he got himself involved in intrigues and plots which led to him being ousted and subsequently turning to banditry for survival. At one point, his following was reduced to a mere handful. It is in this period that he gets the name Tamerlane or Timur the Lame. His right leg was crippled whilst he lost 2 fingers in his right hand, most likely as a mercenary in the service of Amir Khan. Or that he was shot as a result of stealing sheep, but this could easily be the propaganda of the anti-Timurid author Ibn Arab Shah. Despite his physical burdens, Timur's talent in military matters allowed his mercenary career to flourish, soon attracting a large following. Together with his brother-in-law Hussein, he gained control of Transoxiana, and the two divided it amongst themselves. Eventually, Timur's wife would die, providing him the perfect opportunity to attack his erstwhile ally Hussein. In 1370, he was able to successfully besiege and execute his former brother-in-law in Balkh, northern Afghanistan. A key reason for Timur's victory over Hussein was because he was generous, sharing his spoils of war with his people, whilst his brother-in-law was perceived as selfish. Within a tribal or nomadic context, generosity is a key component of winning trust. Before setting his sights on faraway expeditions to Russia or India, Timur was pressed by the need to secure his holdings in his immediate surroundings. So he spent the 1370s consolidating his power in Central Asia by weakening neighboring states and reducing them to vassalage. Considering the grandeur of Timur's conquests upon his death, stretching from the Mediterranean in the west to Delhi in the east, it makes it easy to forget that his greatest victories all occurred in the last 10 years of his life. From the 1360s until the 1380s, he was involved in consolidating his authority in his region. So it was not necessarily the allure of his greatest pinnacles which forged him into the epic conqueror he is remembered to have been. Rather, it was the time he had to spend surviving as a mercenary when he was kicked out of his homeland, and understanding how he had to juggle the joint task of accommodating both his nomadic supporters as well as the settled elements of big cities. Since he was not from the imperial Burjigin clan, that meant Timur could never become the Mongol emperor legitimately, and considerations of legitimacy have always been crucial to the ideal of ruling and kingship. So he tried really hard to root his legitimacy as a leader in his connection to the great Mongol Empire, even marrying the wife of his fallen friend turned foe Hussein, since she was descended from Genghis himself. Subsequently, Timur and his successors, including the Mughals of India, referred to themselves as Gurkhani, meaning son-in-law, as it signified their connection to the glorious Genghis Khan. Since he couldn't be the Khan, he settled for Amir, the Arabic word for prince. But he would go on to become much more than a mere prince. With his realm and power consolidated in the 1370s, Timur began an epic run of conquests for the next 20 years. Starting off with Herat in western Afghanistan in 1383, he focused on Persia first. When the city refused to surrender, he destroyed it and massacred its inhabitants. This was to become characteristic. In the vein of the man he sought to emulate, when a city refused to surrender, Timur would sack and destroy it, so it served as an example for other cities. Over the next decade, he was able to take over all of Persia as well as overrunning Georgia, Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Mesopotamia. A particularly brutal example of his justice in this period was handed out in 1387 to the citizens of Esfahan. The city had surrendered in good fashion without fighting, but when its inhabitants revolted against Timur's taxes and killed his tax collectors, he massacred the citizens, erecting a pyramid of skulls which consisted of 28 towers with 1,500 heads each. In this period, he had to deal with one of his most troubling foes, Tokhtamesh. Earlier, he had been a protege of Timur's. In fact, he was put on the throne of the Golden Horde by Timur. Twice Timur had to invade Tokhtamesh's realm in Russia, in 1391 and 1395. Both times Timur won decisively. The latter would be the last time his former protege would cause him trouble directly, although he lingered on for a while longer. On their second expedition, Timur captured Moscow as well. But now it was time to discover new settings, and like a son who wishes to upstage his father, Timur was always comparing himself to Genghis, who had been unable to secure the rich lands of northern India. So, in 1398, with his excuse of the Muslim Delhi Sultanate being too lenient to its Hindu subjects firmly in hand, Timur crossed the Indus River and achieved what neither Genghis nor Alexander the Great could. In order to defeat the Delhi Sultanate, he had to rely upon his military genius. Standing before him, Timur's enemy had a force of war elephants, normal for Indian warfare, but they terrified Timur's men as they weren't used to the sight of these humongous animals that were literally designed for warfare, kitted out with chainmail and poison tusks. So, Timur ordered his men to build trenches, making his soldiers feel more secure but also blocking the war elephants' charge. He then loaded camels with wood and hay that were then set on fire, so that when the elephants charged, Timur's men would prod the camel with iron sticks, forcing them to run in the direction of the elephants screaming in pain. He likely understood that elephants easily panicked. Petrified by the prospect of screaming camels on fire, the war elephants turned back and subsequently sowed chaos in their own army's ranks. The Delhi Sultanate's army, shocked at the sight of elephants trampling fellow soldiers, now had to deal with Timur's army rushing from their trenches. The battle would result in a decisive victory for the Timurids. Timur's Indian campaign was particularly bloody. Even before he reached Delhi, he was forced to execute up to 100,000 captives he had taken along the way that were slowing him down on his journey to the imperial city. In the aftermath of the victorious battle, upon entering the capital city, the citizens rose up and fought back. Timur, furious at the insult to his authority, ordered a massacre which would overshadow any he had ever carried out before. Killing the citizens and leaving their bodies as food for the birds, Delhi was destroyed so bad that it would take almost a century before it could recover to the levels it was at. Uninterested in remaining in India, soon after he headed back to Transoxiana. Not before he took tons of treasure back with him to his capital, Samarkand. He even needed 90 elephants to carry back stones from quarries which would be used to erect beautiful monuments in his capital like the Bibi Khanum Mosque. It was a feature of Timur's conquests that he would spare the scholars and artisans of lands he subjugated, subsequently bringing them to Samarkand where a proliferation of knowledge occurred. Before the end of 1399, Timur set westward towards the Middle East for his last and greatest expedition, one which would bring him at odds with two other dominant Islamic powers and culminate in a battle for the ages. Along the way, he restored his authority over the Kafkaz region, which was particularly harsh for Georgia, a Christian nation in a mainly Muslim region. In Syria, he was to fight the first of the two dominant Middle Eastern powers, the Mamluks of Egypt. He took the two principal cities, Aleppo and Damascus, the latter of which afforded him a sit-down with the great medieval scholar Ibn Khaldun. Baghdad was flattened, ensuring that all of its buildings were destroyed and ordering a massacre of its inhabitants, killing some 20,000 people. In the meantime, Timur was trading insulting letters with his biggest rival, Sultan Bayezid of the Ottoman Empire. At the time, the Ottomans were riding a wave of momentum that had seen them subjugate almost all the other Turkic beyliks of Anatolia, whilst largely restricting the Byzantines to the environs of Constantinople. In 1396, Bayezid had defeated a crusade at Nicopolis, which earned him the moniker Yildirim, meaning thunderbolt. Not intimidated by these accomplishments, Timur began creating alliances with the few remaining independent beyliks in eastern Anatolia. The peninsula had been conquered by the Mongols before him, so he saw it as his mission to do the same. The two epic leaders began exchanging bitter letters towards the end of the 1390s. In one such letter from Bayezid, he stated, "If I fly from your arms, may my wives be divorced from my bed thrice, but if you have no courage to meet me in the field, may you receive your wives after they have thrice endured the embraces of a stranger." It was very clear that a clash of these two titans was brewing. The tension culminated in 1402 at Ankara in central Anatolia, where Bayezid had to relieve his siege of Constantinople in order to face the new threat from the east. Timur would decisively defeat his rival after he cut the water supply of Bayezid's men and secured the loyalty of some within the Ottoman ranks, a characteristic Mongol strategy. Bayezid was captured, eventually dying in captivity the very next year. Contrary to European depictions of his treatment, that he was apparently caged and humiliated, Timur treated Bayezid well by all accounts. Defeat at the Battle of Ankara did, however, trigger an existential crisis for the Ottomans, as the interregnum, an 11-year period where civil war between Bayezid's sons threatened the very survival of the empire. Timur would continue his Anatolian campaign, successfully besieging Smyrna, which was controlled by the Knights Hospitallers. At this point, Timur was likely the most powerful ruler in the world. He then went home to Samarkand to enjoy his spoils of war. His capital had by now become a resplendent center of imperial glory, with great architectural monuments having been commissioned. But as his life story shows, he would soon become restless and yearned for another expedition. So he planned his next one, his most ambitious one. Having essentially conquered most of the Golden Horde, the Il-Khanat and the Chagatai Khanat, he only had one territory left to become the supreme head of all Mongol territories: China. Some people ascribe his planned invasion of China as an emotional reaction to him being treated as a typical vassal of the Chinese court, and his detainment of the Chinese embassy at Samarkand in 1395 in response to being called a vassal certainly helps this theory. But it fails to mention that Timur had been content with that kind of a relationship for years before 1395. It is likely that he had always planned to attack China, since it was a former Mongol territory, and he only started showing aggression when he had taken care of his other issues. In 1404, he decided that was his next goal. So he set out in December of that year, but he could only get as far as Otrar in Kazakhstan before he fell ill during a cold winter February. And so he died in 1405 after 3 decades of conquests and expansion. The great conqueror was finally laid to rest in his native Samarkand. Timur's legacy is a conflicted one. Today, in his native Uzbekistan and much of Central Asia, he is seen as a hero. But even then, there could be a city he destroyed, like Khiva in Uzbekistan, who will certainly bear resentment against him. The rest of the Islamic world are not particularly fond of him, understandably so, since he did bring destruction to Herat, Delhi, Balkh, Esfahan, Baghdad, Damascus, and Aleppo. The West, strangely enough, has a positive image of him for his victory over the Ottomans, who had been making inroads into the Balkans and were seriously raising the suspicion of European kingdoms. Shakespeare's colleague Marlowe wrote the play Tamburlaine the Great, and the American poet Edgar Allan Poe's first published poem was about Tamerlane. Regardless of how he was received, he was undoubtedly a man of great skill and ability. Endowed with a tremendous sense of pragmatism, he respected the circumstances of not being from royal blood, and throughout his reign his official title was nothing more than Amir or Prince. This is remarkable, considering he is one of history's greatest conquerors, defeating every sultan, emperor, khan, and king put before him. The quality of pragmatism is sometimes vilified for its inherent association with Machiavellianism, but in order to be pragmatic requires a certain degree of mastery of yourself. But for all his strengths, he failed to snap out of the age-old Turco-Mongolian tradition of dividing the realm among the sons. This essentially guaranteed a never-ending cycle of civil wars that would invariably chip away at the empire's territorial integrity. Without the stability brought by a smooth succession, Timur's empire faced disintegration. In the wake of Timur's death, his empire stretched from the Tigris and Euphrates in the Middle East to the Sirdarya and Amudarya in Central Asia. It loomed over in the High Caucasus and nestled gently along the shores of the Persian Gulf. Great cities could be found in Timur's domain. Caravans wandered from Bukhara to Esfahan to Tabriz and beyond. In his time, great caravansarais and mosques were founded, and his neighbors like the Ottoman state had been subdued. Timur's empire had been built by sword and blood, and by the end of his life in 1405, it was poised to dominate the known world, echoing the shadows of the Mongol Empire. And yet, almost immediately, the Timurid Empire found itself in a state of near collapse. When Timur died in 1405, at the age of 71, a succession crisis loomed. His previously appointed heirs had died well before him. His eldest son Jahangir died of illness in 1376, whilst his grandson Muhammad Sultan would perish in 1403. Timur therefore decided upon another grandson, Pir Muhammad, to take the throne. Pir Muhammad was perhaps a good choice. He was 29 years old, he was the governor of eastern Afghanistan, and was the son of Timur's original heir, Jahangir. However, Timur's policies in life and death meant that many of his line had taken up political positions of power throughout the empire. Similar to Mongol traditions, Timur had appointed a number of descendants to govern imperial territory. Various parts of his dynasty ruled lands such as Fars, Azerbaijan, and Khorasan, and these sons and grandsons would establish their own power bases in these territories. Pir Muhammad, based in Afghanistan and therefore somewhat far from Transoxiana, would find himself far from the political center of the empire. Given such circumstances, nearly all of Pir Muhammad's rivals had a claim to the Timurid throne, and few would be readily willing to submit to his rule. As René Grousset describes, on the very morrow of Tamerlane's death, the quarrels, coups, and palace revolutions began. Over the next 15 years, the Timurid Empire would face constant civil wars and infighting. Several parts of the polity would vacillate and at times be part of the empire or be sundered from it. Lines of control had been drawn. Samarkand was controlled by a grandson named Khalil Sultan. The lands of Tashkent and Khojand were ruled by Amir Khudaidad, and one son, a certain Shah Rukh, would operate from his base in Khorasan. Shah Rukh would play an important role in the First Timurid Civil War. Some authors have described him as being the most politically minded of his Timurid peers. Others have used even more poetic language, asserting that he was humane, moderate, a lover of Persian letters, a great builder, a protector of poets and artists, and one of the best rulers Asia ever had. In 1409, a revolt against Khalil Sultan would allow Shah Rukh to capture Samarkand. With the Timurid capital in his control, Shah Rukh had successfully reunited a large portion of the empire, though more threats would remain on the horizon. Although Central Asia and Eastern Iran were now securely under Shah Rukh's control, the western regions, specifically Azerbaijan and Iraq, proved more troublesome. Leaders who had previously been defeated and forced out by Timur now reared their heads. Ahmad Jalayir, once the Sultan of Baghdad, left his exile in the Mamluk Sultanate and successfully recaptured Baghdad. Kara Yusuf, the leader of the Kara-Koyunlu Turkomans, also returned from exile and was able to reconquer the lands of Azerbaijan. At a battle in 1408, Kara Yusuf dealt a devastating blow to the Timurids, killing Miran Shah, a son of Timur. The reign of Jalayir would be short-lived, and instead it would be Kara Yusuf who posed one of the biggest threats to Shah Rukh. By 1418, the Kara-Koyunlu realm stretched from the Kafkaz to Iraq. The two states were now placed in a tense standoff against one another, and Shah Rukh was further motivated by desires of avenging his brother and reasserting Timurid rule on lands that had once been theirs. In around 1419, Shah Rukh launched a major invasion targeting Azerbaijan. In a stroke of luck, Kara Yusuf would die in November 1420. The chief of the Kara-Koyunlu had been marching towards a key battle against the Timurid leader. This sudden death proved to be instrumental for the Timurids, and Shah Rukh would be successful in recapturing Azerbaijan. However, Timurid rule would be rather tenuous in the west. A number of leaders of the Kara-Koyunlu consisted to resist Shah Rukh, including Kara Yusuf's son Iskandar. Conflict between the Timurids and the Kara-Koyunlu would persist for over a decade, and in 1434, after a third major offensive, the Timurids finally seemed to secure victory. Shah Rukh would grant the lands of Azerbaijan to Iskandar's son, Jahan Shah. Thereafter, Jahan Shah would operate as a vassal of the Timurids, though this would change following Shah Rukh's death in 1447. At the other borders of the empire, Shah Rukh would pursue a vigorous foreign policy. Toward the Golden Horde, Shah Rukh would play a preeminent role in managing the Mongol state's politics. He would even offer support to Edu Khan for a time. But as time went on, relations between the two polities declined dramatically, and warfare between the two occurred throughout the 1420s. A similar relationship would continue with the Chagatai state of Mongolistan. In 1425, Shah Rukh sent his son Ulugh Beg to raid Mongolistan. Such efforts would prove to be successful, and Ulugh Beg was able to bring back loot to the Timurids. To the polities of India and China, he would attempt to cultivate peace and trade relations. The Timurids would send a number of embassies and ambassadors to the Chinese emperor, such as one diplomatic mission in 1417. Beyond the realms of warfare and politics, Shah Rukh's long reign would offer one additional consequence: the flourishing of arts and culture. Such developments would manifest into what historians have dubbed as the Timurid Renaissance. The foundation for such advances can be traced to Timur's own policies. In conjunction with his conquests, Timur would also bring craftsmen, artisans, and scholars into his polity. Later rulers would continue this process and would often act as the patrons of many prominent scholars and thinkers. In due course, Persian arts and crafts would once more become celebrated. In this period, a number of illustrated books and manuscripts would be produced. Persian miniatures would take on the form that we know of today. Through Timur's worldwide conquests, the Timurid state would continue the trend of mixing ideas and concepts from other places like China. Jade carving, for instance, would become a renowned skill. The continual influx of these renowned craftsmen and artists would result in cities like Herat and Samarkand becoming cultural centers of learning and art. In a similar vein, Timurid sciences would become renowned and influential. Figures such as Jamshid al-Kashi and Abu Zayn Kahal made important advances in the fields of astronomy and medicine. Other key developments took place in the fields of animal sciences, agriculture, and architecture. Herat, beyond its place as a cultural center, was also known for having developed a bustling agrarian sector that experimented with different fertilizers and various crops. In fact, the Timurids would synthesize agricultural and architectural developments with a Persian flavor, creating their own style of the Chaharbagh garden. Such designs in turn would then influence the construction of gardens in Central Asia and in India. Other architectural developments could be seen in the construction of new mosques and mausoleums. The reigns of Shah Rukh and his son Ulugh Beg would see a promotion of great domes made out of turquoise. Ulugh Beg himself had become a celebrated scholar of science, so much so that today he is primarily known for his work in astronomy and mathematics, specifically spherical geometry. One of the finest minds in the 15th century in terms of astronomy, Ulugh Beg would use his interest in the subject to build the Ulugh Beg Observatory in Samarkand, which would attract the preeminent astronomers of its day. Ulugh Beg's mother, Gauhar Shad, is another fascinating figure. As the chief consort of Shah Rukh, she played an important role in embellishing Herat and other cities with exquisite examples of Timurid architecture, such as the Musala complex in Herat and the Masjid-e Gauhar Shad in Mashhad. Imperial women in Turkic dynasties have tended to play more of an important role in state administration than other Islamic dynasties. After her husband's death in 1447, she took on the role of a kingmaker for her various sons and grandsons. In 1457, well over the age of 80, she was finally outmaneuvered by Abu Sa'id and executed. By the end of Shah Rukh's reign, however, signs of further struggle were growing on the horizon. A number of foreign powers were beginning to encroach on Timurid territory, whilst internal rivals began to agitate. The Uzbek Khanate, for example, would make a number of forays into Transoxiana, raiding and looting a number of settlements. After Shah Rukh died in 1447, the Uzbeks mounted another major offensive and even managed to destroy parts of Samarkand. Though Ulugh Beg had managed to secure the throne, his reign would not last long. The chaotic nature of Timurid politics, as well as the fact that he was not as capable in politics as he was in scholarly endeavors, meant Ulugh Beg's reign would only last for 2 years. Some of his vassals immediately began plots against their newly ascended liege. A power struggle immediately emerged between Ulugh Beg and his son Abdul Latif. This civil conflict would only add to the chaos and devastation wrought by Uzbek raids. In 1449, Abdul Latif emerged victorious at a battle where he captured his own father and later had him killed. The new ruler, now marred by his act of kinslaying, would be murdered just 6.5 months later. This period of chaos and disunity would only continue as scions of the Timurid dynasty fought one another over the scraps of empire. Power lines were once again drawn, with a prince named Abdullah ruling Samarkand and Transoxiana, whilst another named Abul Qasim Babar Mirza ruled the lands of Herat and Khorasan. These were only just some of the many powers that attempted to gain supremacy in the aftermath of Shah Rukh's death. It was at this time that the Uzbek Khanate saw its chance to play kingmaker. Another Timurid, a man named Abu Sa'id, had managed to open diplomatic relations with Abul Khair, the Khan of the Uzbeks. In 1451, buoyed by Uzbek support, Abu Sa'id marched on to Samarkand. With a contingent of nomadic warriors, Abu Sa'id was successful in capturing the city, and in return for Uzbek assistance, he offered them tribute. Just as had been the case in most periods of Timurid history, the capture of Samarkand did not mean an end to civil strife and conflict. Abul Qasim Babur Mirza still retained control of Khorasan, and once more the Khanate of Moghulistan began to raid the frontiers. To restore order to the realm, Abu Sa'id marched against the Mongol invaders, whilst domestically he would empower the religious establishment. From 1458 to 1459, he would be successful in capturing Khorasan, and Herat would be declared the capital of his realm. Thus, he had been successful in restoring large parts of Timur's vast empire. With this momentum, Abu Sa'id began to plan new moves to further his ascent. Though he had been dependent on Uzbek support for a time, he would attempt to reverse the geopolitical downslide of the Timurids as well. After having defeated the Khanate of Moghulistan sometime around 1451, Abu Sa'id would pursue a somewhat interventionist stance. In 1456, he began to support a rival of Ihsan Buka II, the Khan of Moghulistan. This rival was a brother of Ihsan Buka, a man named Yunus. With Timurid support, Yunus returned to Moghulistan and was successful in gaining the support from nobles in the western areas of the Khanate. This eventually flared into a civil conflict, and though Yunus and his Timurid allies failed in their initial uprising, a second war in 1458 succeeded in splitting the Khanate of Moghulistan in two. The Timurid-backed Yunus would rule as Khan of Western Moghulistan, whilst his brother Ihsan Buka would be the Khan of Eastern Moghulistan. Later down the line, Yunus would achieve total victory by once more unifying Moghulistan into a single entity. For Abu Sa'id, this foreign policy would secure the Timurids' northern borders, and raids from that direction would cease for some time. In Western Persia and Iraq, lands that had once been in Timurid control, civil conflict would also provide Abu Sa'id with new opportunities. The Karakuyunlu Turkmens who ruled over much of these lands were beset by war from the Yakkuyunlu, or the White Sheep clan. The Yakkuyunlu had been traditional allies to the Timurids, and in 1467 they were successful in defeating the Kara-Koyunlu and establishing themselves as the masters of Iraq, Azerbaijan, and western Iran. However, Abu Sa'id viewed these developments with suspicion. He may have feared that the growing power of the Yak-Koyunlu would pose a threat to the Timurids, and so in 1469 he marched against the Turkomans. Abu Sa'id's army first headed into Azerbaijan before marching into the areas of modern-day Karabakh. By this point, winter began to set in, and Abu Sa'id's forces found themselves low on provisions. The army attempted to retreat. This would prove disastrous, and soon after, Abu Sa'id's army would be defeated in battle, and the Timurid leader would be executed by Uzun Hasan, chief of the Yak-Koyunlu. With Abu Sa'id's death, the realm splintered once more into several parts. He has been considered by some historians to be the last great Timurid. From this point onward, no other Timurid would be successful in reconstituting the empire established by Timur. Instead, these events solidified the breakaway status of Iraq and Azerbaijan, and the remaining provinces, namely Khorasan and Transoxiana, would fight one another for the scraps. The sons of Abu Sa'id would engage in decades-long civil war. The eldest of them, Ahmad Mirza, controlled the core territories of the former empire, including Samarkand and Tashkent. Another brother ruled Fergana, one more ruled Kabul, and so forth. Other branches of the Timurid dynasty would rear their heads. In Khorasan, Hussein Baykara, who claimed descent via Timur's son Umar Sheikh Mirza, would take the reins of power and would rule for around 40 years. And so from 1469 to 1495, there was a period of fragmentation, but also, interestingly, a period of continuity. In these 3 decades, these Timurid princes would maintain relatively consistent control over their territories. The political stability played a large role in creating what some scholars have dubbed the Second Timurid Renaissance. The lands of Hussein Baykara would prosper in this period. After capturing Herat in 1469 and a brief conflict with the Yak-Koyunlu Turkomans, Hussein Baykara was able to cement his rule over Khorasan. From that point, the Sultan limited his own military excursions and fortified his borders along the Amudarya. Like other Timurid rulers, Hussein Baykara would engage in reconstruction efforts in Herat. Once more, the city would find itself thriving and becoming a center of culture. Libraries flourished, and Herat would develop a strong presence in manuscript production. Under its longtime ruler, poets and scholars would make their way to Khorasan. Figures like the Sufi Abdul Rahman Jami would create great works of poetry dedicated to the court of Hussein Baykara. One of the most famous figures to emerge in this period of time was Kamal ad-Din Behzad, who was a renowned painter. Behzad would create extremely well-produced Persian miniatures and manuscript illuminations, and his work would even survive the Timurids. Later in his life, Behzad would find himself under the patronage of the Safavids, and thereby continuing Timurid artistic traditions for years on. Eventually, this artistic tradition would find its way to the Mughal courts of India, a fitting home considering the Timurids were the ancestors of the Mughals in the first place. Whilst these decades allowed a second resurgence of arts and culture, it would be wrong to imply that these decades were completely peaceful. These rulers continued to squabble against one another over various territories. Even Hussein Baykara would wage additional conflicts later in his reign. In one incident, Baykara's eldest son, Badi al-Zaman, erupted in revolt against his father, putting the state in a disastrous civil war that would only set the stage for future conflicts down the line. Once again, the Timurid states would face the wrath of their own dynastic kin. Foreign developments would also start to come ahead. A reunited Khanate of Moghulistan would once more make forays into the region. In fact, Yunus Khan, the very same Yunus who had won his throne through Abu Sa'id's support, had now reversed the situation. Now the united Khanate of Moghulistan often interfered in the petty fighting between the Timurid princes. Often, Yunus Khan would support Umar Sheikh, a son of Abu Sa'id, from attacks from his brother Ahmad Mirza. Internal processes would however lead to the eventual collapse of these polities. In the realms of Ahmad Mirza and Mahmud Sultan, many of the vassal begs were pursuing their own independent agendas. The governors of various towns and provinces would gain greater autonomy and power, and in some cases, these rulers eclipsed their nominal overlords. From 1494 to 1495, several of the long-standing Timurid rulers had perished. Umar Sheikh Mirza, ruler of Fergana, died on June 8, 1494, leaving behind his 11-year-old son Babar to rule. This is the same Babar that would establish the Mughal Empire in India some 30 years later. Umar Sheikh's older brother, Ahmad Mirza, passed away in July not too long after. Finally, another brother named Mahmud Mirza, based in Balkh, died in January of the next year. Within a single year, a number of major Timurid players had become deceased, and as expected, the next few years would result in significant chaos. The next rulers of these territories were young and easily manipulated by their vassals. Civil war across the Timurid lands intensified dramatically. In many areas, the socio-economic situation declined dramatically as well. Reports of famine and financial ruin were noted to encroach closer and closer. By the start of the 16th century, the Timurid collapse was nearing its completion. The trajectory of history would forever change with the consolidation of power on the northern frontiers. In the steppes of Central Asia, various Turco-Mongol groups were coalescing under the weight of a single man, Muhammad Shaybani Khan. The figure of Muhammad Shaybani Khan would take shape during this period of civil conflict. He had initially found service as a leader of a military unit under Sultan Ahmad Mirza. After allying himself with the Khan of Mogholistan, Muhammad Shaybani would begin to find himself on the ascendancy. There is one story told about Muhammad Shaybani that paints a vivid portrait about his decision making. We are told that the Khan was beginning to consider his political path and consulted with his Sufi teacher, a man named Mansur. The Sufi ordered the Khan to bring a tablecloth. After having done so, Mansur turned toward Muhammad Shaybani and uttered the following: "In the same way as a tablecloth is picked up from the corner, you should start to build a state from the corner." Whether or not such words are true, Muhammad Shaybani Khan would follow through on this very principle. He would return to Timurid lands with ambition and drive, seeking to carve out a state for himself. As a supposed descendant of Genghis Khan through the line of Jochi, he may even have viewed it as his right to rule over these lands. And so, around the year 1500, Muhammad Shaybani, Khan of the Uzbeks, launched an invasion of the disparate Timurid states. He marched through Transoxiana and immediately captured major cities there, including Bukhara. With momentum on his side, the Khan marched towards Samarkand. In 1501, he was successful in taking over the city, the settlement that had once been the capital of Timur. The fall of Samarkand would be particularly important, and among one of the many individuals fleeing the Uzbeks was Babar. The year 1501 would see not only the rise of the Uzbek Khanate in the lands of western Iran, another major power was consolidating its authority, the Safavid Persians. The story of the Timurids is a typical one for Turco-Mongolian dynasties. Formidable founder, fratricidal successions, fearsome army, and failure to put together sustainable state-building practices. It arrived on the world scene with a ferocity unseen since the conquests of Genghis Khan, but within a century of Timur's death, the empire lay in ruins. Their contribution to the arts and sciences would far outlive them, however. Their advances, specifically in the fields of astronomy and Islamic art, would inspire scholars over the coming centuries. Out of their ruins arose the mighty Mughal Empire of India. Babar, the first Mughal ruler, had been kicked out of his native lands in Central Asia and made several attempts to reconquer his patrimony, but faced with the prospect of consistent failure in doing so, he shifted his attention south. to the rich and abundant lands of the subcontinent. He and his successors remained proud of their Timurid heritage, continuing to refer to themselves as Gurkhani, meaning son-in-law. This was the term the Timurids used as it signified their connection to the glorious Genghis Khan, a descendant of whom had married Timur. So whilst it seems on the surface that the Timurids came and went in such a short space of time, their legacy would live on for centuries to come, even if it was in foreign lands. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'm trying to make an effort to put out more documentary length videos. As usual, big thank you to my patrons for your continued support. And I want to give a shout out to Nomads and Empires podcast for his help in scripting part of this video. Please make sure to check out his podcast, the link is in the description below. Until next time, peace!